Today I'm going to be working on the blacksmith version of the traditional fireplace tongs. This project is a special request from a friend of mine. His father was a third-generation blacksmith, and he was in the process of teaching him blacksmithing, and this was the next project that they were going to be working on. Unfortunately, he passed away before they got a chance to work on this, so I was asked to see if I can replicate a pair of tongs that he had made and to give him an idea of how all of this goes together. So that's what I'll be doing today. I'm going to be using 1/2 inch square bar today, and I'm going to start by creating the offset just below the hinge joint. I'm going to create the hinge joint first because that way if it messes up and I don't get it to work right, then there isn't a lot of time invested in this project. I can simply cut it off and start over. Now I'm going to start by laying out the hinge joint. This is a very narrow chisel, so it'll split the bar, but it won't displace a lot of material, so I won't be deforming the offset or squashing the raised portion of the bar. Here I'm using a narrow chisel that has a much steeper bevel, and that allows me to drive the punch right down to the anvil and spread open the top part of the hinge joint. And then I'm going to use this narrow chisel to drive right down to the anvil and create a very, very thin score line. Once that score line is well defined, I can flip the bar over and use the punch to clear out the opening. Now I'm going to start working on the other half of the hinge and forge out that narrow section that needs to fit into the recess that we just forged on the other half. I just need a short offset here because most of this material is going to be cross-peened out, so I'm going to gain the length that I need to fit the joint that way. Again, I'm just forging the bare minimum to see if this joint's going to work, and then I'll finish the rest of the tongs around the hinge joint. They usually turn out okay, but this is a forged joint, so if something does go wrong, there really isn't a lot you can do about it. You pretty much have to get it right the first time or start over. It's not like a machine joint where you can put it back into a milling machine or something and correct whatever inaccuracies you have. Here I'm just using a fullering tool to roughly lay out the angle for the offsets that I need. Here I'm just estimating to see whether I can drive these two pieces together to form the joint. If I feel that I need to correct anything, I'll do it now before proceeding. Peter Ross often says about these kind of joints, you don't have to make them fit, you just have to create the propensity for them to fit. So at this point I feel I have enough propensity, so I'm going with it. I'm driving the two pieces together and I'm using the actual hinge joint to start to fit the other side. Now I'm ready to actually start defining the shape of the hinge. I'm using a heavy cross peen to draw out the cheeks of the hinge, and the inserted portion of the hinge is cold, so I can use it as a mandrel to shape the hinge around it. Here I'm reversing the process that I did earlier. Now the inserted portion of the hinge is very hot and the outside of the hinge is relatively cold. So when I hammer the outside, it's going to finish the fullering that I need to make a flush hinge joint. Now that the forging for the hinge joint is complete, I can continue forging the rest of the tongs. Here I'm just defining the shoulder for the handle portion of the tongs. Here I'm using a bolt heading tool to create the upset that I need for the finial. You'll notice that this tool has a shoulder all the way around it so it doesn't get driven down past the vice jaws. To make the tong symmetrical, I need to bend both halves at exactly the same spot. So I've set this in the vise and then I just bent them around the jaws of the vise. The first bend is from the curved section of the tong and connects to the arms of the tongs. The next bend defines the start of the curved section. So the straight section of bar between these two bends is what I'm going to be using for the curved section of the tongs. Here I'm welding the upper arm to a 3/8 round, which is going to make the main section of the arms. Once the arms are assembled and the hinge joint is roughly fitted, you're ready to drill the pivot hole and set the rivet. Now that I have the rivet to lock everything in place, I can do the final shaping on the arms. I'm just using a bending fork to tweak everything so that it lines up and looks correct. Once I have this done, I'm going to throw everything back in the fire and I'm going to hammer the hinge joint shut, and I'm just going to work it loose very carefully to allow it to free itself. I may have to do this a couple of times to get the joint working properly, but basically that's the way blacksmiths used to machine a hinge joint. The working end of these tongs is usually just forged into a large pad that's just cross-peened out of the end of the bar, and then they're just bent slightly to give them a little bit of shape.